Hello and welcome to the RetroRGB Weekly Roundup. I'm the guest host this week, Smokemonster. I'm sending in for Bob, who's away, and I am proud and humbled to be the first and only guest host for the news. So, got a lot of cool stuff this week. Really excited to cover it, so let's jump right in. This week we've got something a little different because I'm going to be filling in for Bob, RetroRGB, for the Weekly Roundup. And I'm already learning that it's a big job because I've got a big list of things to cover, and it's not easy. So before I start, I want everybody to consider becoming a patron of Bob's, because I can tell you, I've got a relatively easy week of news to cover here, and it is tough. It's hard to keep up with. It's hard to write the articles, and he's got to manage the website, edit the video, do all that kind of stuff. So definitely consider becoming a patron. Even at the $1 level, you get access to all of his Patreon exclusive stuff. So you get early access to his videos. He has lots of Patreon exclusive videos, and you also get entered into the Discord giveaways, also known as the previously Patreon giveaways. So yeah, consider supporting Bob. If you're already supporting him at the $1 level, bump it up to $2, just because Bob's working really hard, and I'm getting a taste of that this week. So huge thanks to Bob for letting me fill in, and thanks for joining me here. And as you guys probably guessed, I've been doing a lot of Mr. related things, and so this week there's a lot of Mr. news. And before I start on that, I want to explain really quickly what Mr. is, just to catch people up who might not know. Mr. is an FPGA-based multi-console, so you can think of it kind of like a Raspberry Pi, except that it has a Cyclone 5 FPGA processor on it, so it's using sort of the same emulation technique as the famous consoles like the AVS and the analog Super NT and NT Mini. So theoretically, you can have most excellent, I won't say perfect, but most excellent hardware emulation depending on how good the cores are written for it. And Mr. has a lot of cores already, and a lot of those cores are ready to use. So everybody's getting on board for Mr., and I'm proud to be sort of behind a lot of that hype, at least. Okay, and the first piece of news that we've got is Joseph Miggied on the FrameMeister OSSC Upscaler group on Facebook replaced his original acrylic panels with laser cut walnut wood panels, and it looks really cool. This is really classing up the old OSSC, and as you guys can imagine, I'm thinking, man, I want that for my Mr. Although we should really wait until the board, maybe 6 months from now when the board layouts and everything are complete, but this would be a really cool thing to do. And I guess he posted the files so that anybody can have their own panels cut. You could do it with cheaper wood too, I imagine. And I guess apparently it's a thing where they'll laser cut like wood for you online if you send them your the layout files. So that's pretty cool. Bob thought that this looks a lot like the CMVS by Analog, the original one, which was actually a solid block of wood. That thing was pretty cool. I don't have that. And next, we've got the Wii Dual installation video here by Dan, who's showing how to install it, and it's got a really nice guide, walks you through the whole thing. It's an hour and a half long, shows you all the little secrets that you gotta know. So huge thanks to him for posting that, and well done. And moving on, we've got a new Nintendo Switch custom firmware. And this is compatible with all Switches up until the hardware change around July of 2018. And at the moment, you'll need to boot into custom firmware mode, CFW mode, every time you power on. So it's kind of like the original Henkaku for the Vita, or some of the earlier PSP mods, where you need to run it every time you power on. So right now it's not permanent, but remember, all those old hacks became permanent at some point. So if you guys are hacking your Switches, this is pretty cool. I don't have one, but I'll get a Wii or a Switch in like a year, maybe, when they're a little cheaper. Old Smokemonster doesn't usually keep up with the current hardware. I wait until it gets cheap and I can buy it on eBay used. And I am holding out for the Switch SPU XL with brighter screen that's coming in about 2 years after 5 hardware revisions. And next up we have Jenovi's unreleased 3DO M2 games, which is the follow-up to the series he's been doing on the 3DO. And yeah, just a really professional video, lots of cool clips of the games and the story behind them, so check that out. And Hyperkin has announced HDMI cables for the Xbox and the original Xbox, the OG, and the Dreamcast, which is cool because it's just nice to see the Dreamcast and the Xbox getting some attention. There are some caveats, of course. We need to see some footage of these in action first. I personally am wary of these. I think that they're going to have not so great video output, and for perfectionists like the people watching the RetroRGB Weekly Roundup, you guys might be critical of some of these things. So take a look at the preview videos first. Like Metal Jesus Rocks did a really good review of some new HDMI cables that had come out for the Xbox last year, maybe 6 months ago, and those to me turned out to look pretty bad, even compared to the original Xbox HD box by Microsoft, where you could use component. But it's cool to see them getting some attention, and not everybody has fancy upscalers, and new TVs don't even have component inputs on them, apparently. My new one here in Brazil doesn't, but I got that for free, so I'm not complaining. But yeah, that'll be, of course, probably, well, I don't know if it does scaling and all that kind of stuff, so it might be dependent on whether or not your TV supports these custom resolutions, or maybe not, but yeah, it's just cool to see new products for these systems, I guess. And next, ROM hacker Corpse Grinder has released a really cool ROM hack, Super Mario Bros. NES with 2 players simultaneously. So these kind of hacks are both the rarest and the most difficult to pull off. So you're adding a completely new gameplay element to a classic game. So what you can do with this is it's no longer 1 and 2 player take turns 2-player style. It's 1 and 2 player. It's 2 player simultaneous Super Mario Bros. So player 1 is Mario and player 2 is Luigi. So how cool would this be to see like 2 super speedrunning Mario gamers playing simultaneously together to like annihilate Super Mario Bros. Cooperative mode? I'm looking forward to seeing that. And I always screw up the pronunciation, so correct me if I'm wrong. People are going to complain in the comments, but I think that the ROM hacker's name was Corpse Grinder, or maybe it's Corpse Grinder. I'm not sure. But yeah, sorry, I'm really bad with pronunciation, so sorry guys, but you're just gonna have to live with it. So just F off and yeah, unsubscribe. Okay, so now we're gonna get into a big set of Mr. news, and this is really just catching up since last week. So you can really see that the ball is rolling on Mr. There's so much going on that I can't even keep up with it. I'm sure I've missed a few things here, but I did my best today to scramble all day long and sort out all the news for the week. So this is 1 week of Mr. News coming up. So I did a video that kind of got the ball rolling on the Mr. hype a couple weeks ago, and as I explained in that video, the main thing that draws me to Mr. are the arcade cores. So if you think of a console core, like if there was an NES core, you write the core and it runs like 1,000 NES games or however many, Super Famicom, Famicom Disk System maybe, that kind of stuff. With the arcade systems, each arcade game basically had its own platform to some degree. So you would have a PCB that maybe only played one single game. Now there were some that played multiple games, like the Neo Geo MVS, of course, plays hundreds of games. The Capcom CPS-1, CPS-2, CPS-3, those are multi-game systems where you write one core and you can get a whole bunch of games. But for more obscure classic games, there are a bunch of cores that are basically, you can think of them as a core that's just made for one game. So it's translating the hardware on the PCB into FPGA terms. So as Kev described when he was on with Bob, it's not really coding, it's more like translating a schematic into the FPGA so that it can reconfigure itself. And so a lot of work goes into getting one game running, like Donkey Kong or Burger Time. And when it's done, you have something that's superior to MAME in a lot of ways, because it's basically MAME ROMs but ran on a hardware reconfiguration, reimplementation, whatever you want to call it, hardware emulation. And the arcade cores are really good on Mr. And if you have the I/O board for analog RGB, you can hook it right into an arcade monitor itself. You can run it into your PVM, into your CRT, because it does component output. It does VGA output. You can do Scart, BNC, whatever you put on there, basically, it's got. And if you run it through the HDMI output of the DE10 Nano, you can actually do things like scaling and rotation. And that is a really cool feature to me, because when you're running arcade boards, let's say you have the original Donkey Kong. Donkey Kong's a vertical game, and so you really need to have in your arcade or your game room, you need to have a vertical monitor and a horizontal monitor, so 2 different monitors. And if you were just to emulate Donkey Kong straight up, you would of course have to rotate your actual monitor and rotate your controls. But the Mister, because it has scaling features and those kind of things, and it does extremely low latency scaling at this point, but it can be improved. You can do rotation, that kind of stuff. So you no longer need to turn your actual screen vertical to play Donkey Kong or Burger Time, or maybe if Dig Dug ever happens, which somebody should make happen, because we've already got Galaga, and Galaga and Dig Dug are similar in a lot of ways. What happened this week, now that we've caught up on the arcade cores, what they are and how they work. So basically, the arcade cores were made originally just to run one game, or maybe they could be tweaked to run other games that are similar to that hardware, but you run into this issue where you can only have, for an arcade core, like if you have a Donkey Kong core and you wanted to have a Donkey Kong core running a hack, you would run into some conflicts there because of just the way things were set up. But a new feature was added to Mister, this using the ROM injector tool, where you can inject a ROM right into the RBF file, which is the core file for Mister. And that was originally made basically to keep your folders organized, where you don't need to have each core sometimes needs different boot ROMs and those kind of things. So you could consolidate all of that into one ROM, basically. But NML32 realized that that's also a good way to do arcade hacks, because now you're no longer going to run into conflicts if you can take the Donkey Kong core, make a copy of it, but inject a hacked Donkey Kong ROM. Because a big thing back in the day, and it's still going on to some degree, an operator could just remove the EEPROMs on an arcade board and replace them with hacked ROMs, and then you have an all-new game to play, basically. And on a lot of boards, it's just that simple. On some boards, it's far more technical, and obviously those aren't going to be great candidates for Mister hacks like this. But for the games where it's just a matter of like changing out 1 or 2 EEPROMs or changing all of them out, not having to touch the actual hardware, then you can do the same thing digitally. You can plug in new EEPROMs to the Mister core. And that's what NML32 has been doing, and he's posting these videos on his YouTube channel with some of these awesome hacks. And let me just pull one of them up here. Here is Ms. Pac-Man Neon, where you can see it's kind of a vector style to it. Pretty cool. I mean, this is also, it's better than doing this in MAME, because again, this is, unless you're going to be making your own custom bootleg ROM boards, which nobody really wants to do, because if you have a Pac-Man board, most people want to either just do a speed-up ROM or just leave it the way it is. So this gives you a way to experiment with things in a nice hardware emulation and play some hacks. So he's also done a bunch of them, actually. I think around 20 or 25, and I've got them all. And he's been posting videos on his YouTube channel of them running. A really cool one that everybody is excited about is this Burger Time vector hack, where it's Burger Time, the arcade game, but with vector style graphics, and man, is it cool looking. Definitely want to dive into that one. And you can do, for some on some boards, you can do speed hacks that don't require any other changes to the hardware. So like here's Galaga with fast shooting, because obviously that's not gonna require any more horsepower to pull off. But one of the annoying things about Galaga, if you've played it a million times, for the last 30 years, is maybe you want to shoot faster. So there you go. So really cool stuff, and a huge thank you to NML32 for doing this, and for writing the instructions on how to do it, and for hooking me up with the files. So, okay, now for one that I'm really excited about, and this is featuring Electron Ash, who is right here in the live stream in the chat with us right now. So Electron Ash has been working for a little while on the LL Cool Joy add-on board for Mister, which is an add-on board that's going to allow for ultra low latency. As Bob explained in the last week's weekly roundup, it's essentially lag-free. I mean, there will be some processing, obviously, anytime you're dealing with controllers, but it's ultra fast. And what people want with Mister is right now, if you want to use like an NES controller, you have to use a USB adapter, which obviously that translation to USB and even going through the USB circuit on the DE10 Nano, it's going to add some sort of lag, even if it's minuscule, which it is right now. It has really good USB processing, so it already is ultra low lag. But if we have this powerful hardware emulation platform that has zero lag analog output, you really want to have the lowest latency possible. And so that's what this controller board does, because the cool thing about the DE10 Nano, it has direct hardware access to the FPGA via the pins. And so what Ash is doing, he originally started with just a controller board with a couple of controller inputs on it for like Sega Genesis and Atari. And then it's been evolving. We've been talking about it in the Smokemonster Elite Patreon Discord channel. And everybody's, feature creeping on him and asking for more things. But we were talking about it like, what's the most efficient way to do the controllers? Because you could put every controller under the sun on there. You could have Super Nintendo, PlayStation, everything. But you don't actually need all of those, really, when you stop to think about it. The absolute minimum that you would really want if you're doing a controller board is you'd want DB9 for Genesis, Atari, and all of those systems that use the DB9 connector. You'd want a DB15 port, which would allow direct access in with no processing at all for controllers like, well, any arcade equipment is using just simple on-off style controller switches. And that's the exact same thing that's in like the Neo Geo MVS, AES, and CD controller. Those use DB15, and it also allows for pad hacking out into DB15 so that you could pad hack a controller and have direct hardware output from it. So that's cool. So it has two of those, two DB9s, and then also has, this was my idea, and Ash actually has been making it work. I said it would be kind of cool if you could use RJ45, so an Ethernet connector, to stream in any controller under the sun, because you really could. All you have to do is you take a cheap extension cord, cut off the male end, and replace that with an RJ45 connector, which is really easy to do, by the way, with a crimper. And you can make a $2 adapter for basically any controller ever made. And that idea led to Ash adding the RJ45 connectors, and we're going to go with the MC Cthulhu pinout. Now, it's not using the MC Cthulhu signal or anything like that. We're just going to use the pinout, and we're going to take the direct controller information in through the RJ45. I say we. I'm not doing anything. I'm just looking at it. Ash is the man behind all of this. And the cool thing that happened last week, in addition to adding all these new features, he integrated it with the USB board for the Mister, which before was another add-on board. So the Mister, it was starting to get kind of tall. I mean, if we did have to do every single one of these as an individual board, the thing's going to look a bit like a desktop computer. And I actually thought that you could make a 3D printed case for it that looks like an old desktop computer from the 90s, and I thought that would be pretty cool, like an old IBM or something. But we don't really want to have to keep buying all these different boards, so it's best to consolidate them as much as you can. And so Ash pulled in the USB board, which is an open source project, and so now it's the LL Cooljoy is also a USB hub, and it has 6 USB inputs too that you can use for any USB controller. Basically, you can plug it in and test your luck. Kudos to Electron Ash for making this happen. This is a dream come true, and it's really... This is, when I saw the Mister project, everybody has all these features they want. I really just wanted 2 things. I wanted a way to plug in controllers directly, and I want a RetroArch style update system. And Teddy, who is also here in the chat right now, is working on that update system. So that should happen eventually. He has something really cool in the works, and that'll allow you to update it from within Mister, just like with the RetroArch. Update the cores directly. And next up, we have some Mister improvements, including updates to the Genesis core. And people are probably thinking that the Genesis core is getting tons of love lately, and they're probably thinking that has something to do with the Mega SG and there's like a competition thing. It's actually not. The Genesis core has been getting lots of attention for like the past month, and that predates anything with the Mega SG, so it's just a coincidence. And as I said in my reveal video for the Mister, the Genesis core was kind of not in ship shape a couple weeks ago. It had lots of little quirks to work out and things like that. Now, all of a sudden, after 4 or 5 updates that have come out since that video. It is fantastic. And it's a really great core, and you definitely should check it out. And some of the cool things that happened this week, in addition to some bug fixes and little things, Electron Ash, actually, again, he worked out the bugs that were causing like some weird audio issues with certain games. Like you could hear, everybody heard it in the Rings and Sonic, for example. And that was an easy fix. And then there are a bunch of other sound-related fixes done by Sorgelig, I believe. Alexei, if you guys don't know, he's kind of like, if Kevtris is to the analog products, as Alexei is to the FPGA, the Mister product. The Mister project. So he's kind of the man behind a lot of this stuff. And so as you can see, tons of updates to various things in the Genesis core. And we also had a cool thing that Risha did. Risha, a lot of you know her. She really wanted sharper scaling. A lot of us had, and a lot of people called for that if they saw my video of the Mister clips that I released. They said it could just be a tad bit sharper. And actually, if you had compared it back then, the 240p output to an OSSC upscaled to 1080p was sharper than the original scalers. And that all might be changing now that we have more attention on this. So Rene from DB Electronics and Voltar have already been talking about completely redoing the scaler from the ground up. But before that happens, the scaler's in really good shape now. All of a sudden, it has, Risha was working on nearest neighbor scaling, and she's got that working. And Sorgelib pulled that into the main cores for a bunch of them already, into the core file for, let's see, for the NES, the PC Engine, TurboGrafx 16, and SuperGrafx core, and the SMS. And if you compare these pictures I posted on the RetroRGB.com news to the video that I streamed, you can see it's really sharp now all of a sudden. And there are lots of little things changed under the hood too from Mister, including a really cool feature that everybody is excited about. So you can load a core coefficient file. And all that is a text file explaining various functions of the scaler. And immediately all of us thought, all right, Firebrand X style profiles. And you can do sort of that kind of stuff with this. So we can now create custom scaler configs and share those with each other and tweak the cores to get the kind of video output we want. So that's pretty cool. And that also added vertical integer scaling. So a lot of people had requested that. If you've seen videos where the pixels aren't perfect squares, it's just because that was filmed before integer scaling was part of the Mister. Now I assume that any videos you're going to see going forward are going to have perfectly square pixels, and that's pretty cool. Everybody wants that. So that was Sorgelig and Risha behind that. We've also got save support, save files for the Sega Master System core added. And yeah, just tons of stuff going on. I feel like by the time I've even opened my mouth about this, there will be more cool stuff happening. So hopefully next week we'll have even more main core updates for Mister. And speaking of analog RGB output, if you have the I/O board, as I said in my launch video, you can use those cheap, you know, like $2 or $5 monoprice VGA to whatever adapters. So VGA to component, just straight up VGA. You can go VGA to BNC, VGA to Scart, whatever you want. VGA to whatever, basically analog, and it'll work. But those cables aren't really ideal. One, they pick up a lot of audio noise, especially if you have a busy area like behind your computer, behind your entertainment center. And they're just not, they're not ideal for Mister use. They work, but they're not perfect, that kind of thing. You know, just like using cheap RGB cables, you get what you pay for. So a cool thing that happened this week was Retro Accessories, retroaccess.com introduced a Mister Scart cable, which is a VGA to Scart cable that's totally set up the way you would want it from Mister. It's the D-Sub-15 port. You could configure it so that instead of a Scart end on it, it could have a BNC end on it, for example, to plug right into your PVM or your BNC switcher, Extron kind of switchers and things like that. So yeah, huge thank you to her for making these, and I expect nothing but the best. This is what Risha uses, I believe. She used the custom cable builder to make her analog cables. So if you'd seen my really early Mister videos where I was showing 240p analog to the OSSC, was going through this. So really cool. How about some HD Retrovision component cables for Mister? That would be cool. Just to put that thought out there. And if you ever wonder why the ST is capitalized in Mister, That's a holdover from the MIST project, and that refers to the Atari ST system. And everybody's kind of has laughed about the fact that Mister doesn't actually have an Atari ST core. Well, that's because it's still in the works and hasn't been released yet. But there is a core. And Binary Bond 007 just posted a video of Beverly Hills Cop on the beta Atari ST core, which is made by IJOR, IJOR. And it's looking good, so I assume we're going to see this one coming out pretty soon. So those of you who are big into Atari stuff, this is going to be right up your alley. Look at that majestic parallax scrolling there. It's like you're in the movie. It's kind of violent. Okay, and I mentioned that the Retro Roundtable guys were kind of getting into Mister, a few of them, and in that vein, Renee and Voltar opened up a Discord channel that's public. Anybody can join, and it's explicitly for Mister development talk. So if you're into Mister dev stuff, go join the fun. Now, I am kind of the hype train behind Mister. Keep that in mind for this next story. I don't want to jump the gun here, but Mister does theoretically support 1200p. So that's like 120 better than 1080p. And immediately, those of you who can do math are thinking, well, that's 5x 240p integer scaling, kind of like what exactly like what the OSSC does. And you would be right. The Mister, basically, the DE10 Nano is the bottleneck as far as what resolutions are supported. And Electron Ash thinks that realistically, 1600 by 1200 is about the cutoff where we're going to still be able to get 60 frames per second video out of the Mister. And 4K is really out of the question before you even ask about that. We would need about twice as many pins on the DE10 Nano in order to get that. So it's not to say that it won't happen in a future Mister. It's just not going to happen while Mister is based on the DE10 Nano platform. So one day that could happen, but right now the best you're going to be able to get is 1200p. And Risha posted some pictures of, she hacked the NES core up to run 1200p, and it looks great. The caveat being, of course, that your display or your scaler is going to need to support these custom resolutions. So if it supports it, it's going to be pretty cool, but this is still basically a tech demonstration, and it's not really ready for the masses yet. There would have to be changes to all the cores before this happened, but it's cool to see what's possible in the Mister, and it's super sharp. And another interesting thing that you can do is you can do your scan doubling in any core, or your line doubling, before any of the scaling. So kind of like the same way that the RetroTink works as just a simple 2x scaler, you can do that with any core to get 240p to 480p or whatever. And that's a really nice, another way to just get ultra sharp scaling working, and that doesn't add any lag whatsoever, so it's pretty cool. And I said the Mister project is getting popular, and Tinkerplunk.com, Jacob Proctor, also known as Arithmaldor, originally had planned to do small batches of the latest and greatest I/O board and SDRAM boards, which are basically going to be, anybody who's going to get a Mister for serious use is going to want both of those. So even the I/O board, even if you're not interested in the analog video right now, you are going to need that second SD card slot eventually for something, because different cores can use that as a second hard drive, basically. And so he was going to do a small batch for the Smokemonster Elite Discord members, but you could tell right away that this was very, very popular. Basically, everybody wanted them. And so instead of doing small batches, he just decided to do 101 I/O boards and SDRAM boards as a pre-order so that he could raise the funds to order the parts. He opened up pre-orders, and we tweeted about it, and in about just a little over 24 hours, he sold out all the sets, so 101 boards. And those of you who are on Twitter, that was great for you, but other people are going to be needing another source. So if you are one of these people who makes boards, really consider picking up and making Mister I/O and SDRAM boards. You don't need to worry about the USB hub really yet, just because it's going to be better to wait until the LL Cool Joy controller / USB hub is done, because that's going to be the one that people are going to want. Things like the real-time clock, you don't really need that board for anything. And I'm starting to see that it's more and more useless the more I look into it, because the Mister has Wi-Fi, and it'll grab the time off of your network anyways for anything that needs the time. So it's really just adding one more point of failure one day when that battery starts leaking or it goes dead anyways. So Mister's getting popular. Thank you to Jacob for offering those, because most of the people who wanted one, the big names in YouTube, I know a lot of them are getting these, and he's going to send a courtesy set to Corey from My Life in Gaming, which is going to be awesome if they do a video on it. And I know a bunch of other bigwigs who are getting it too, so it's pretty cool. And I've got mine ordered, and hopefully I'll have that. I should be able to start making my own Mister video capture videos in about a month and a half or so. Alright, that about does it for the week. Thanks for joining, and Bob will be back next week at the regular time on Wednesday. And like I said, please make sure to subscribe to him, hit that bell icon so you get notified for his new videos. Like this one if you liked it, and maybe I'll see you again in the future if it went over okay. And again, please consider becoming a patron of Bob's on Patreon. The guy is a hero amongst us, and he deserves every penny he can get for this. And who knows, one day maybe we can make him our full-time weekly news reporter. So thanks again, it's been fun. It's Smokemonster, and I'll see you later.